Welcome everybody. Welcome to the third in our series of seminars. Today we have Judi AUBEL, the president of the Grandmother Project, and I'm sure she will explain what that all is about. The first time I met Judi was at the World Congress on Communication for Development, which was organized by a couple of international organizations, among them the World Bank, FAO, Communication Initiative. And as I was the chair of the scientific committee, I had to coordinate the selection process of all the scientific papers, so to speak, papers which were submitted through a web-based kind of selection process. And after going through a first and a second round, we were then asked by the organizers also to identify the best or the most interesting papers. And again, that created a bit of back and forth negotiations among the members of the scientific committee and the organizers, but Judi's paper was one of them. And she also submitted it to our journal, and I have a couple of copies with me of the article, which then will be published, or should have been published already in Communication for Development and Social Change. So I'm very pleased that Judi was able to make it on her tour of her home country. And I'll leave it at that. Judi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. No, it's a pleasure for me to be here and to share with you. I think it's the first time, especially in this sort of setting, that I've been able to share some new work that we're involved with related to intergenerational learning and intergenerational communication. It's very much a work in progress, and so I think for me today I'm interested to share with you and get some of your ideas and perhaps suggestions, and perhaps find potential collaborators for the future for applied research documentation sort of activities related to the activities of our, I call it a micro NGO, very small. I think we're doing some very interesting work. Someone said the other day, cutting edge work. I think it might be cutting edge, and we're also maybe at the edge of survival and falling over the edge. But anyway, small is beautiful, right? So let me tell you a bit about my my background. I think it's important always. How did this come about that someone with friends and colleagues created an organization called the Grandmother Project, Strong Grandmothers, Healthy Communities. That's the other part of the name of the organization. My training is on the one hand, in adult education, also in public health and health education. I did a master's in public health at Chapel Hill in health education, and also did an advanced degree in England in education and anthropology. And I lived for about 15 years in Senegal, and worked in really all the French-speaking countries in West Africa, mostly working with international NGOs in maternal and child health programs. Most of my training is actually in education, but have mostly worked in community health, and also had the fortune, because of languages and all, to have also done some work in Latin America, especially in Ecuador and Nicaragua and a few other places, and a bit in Asia. My interest through all of this, through all of my career, has always been the the interface between cultural realities and contexts and development programs. In the health world, more specifically, that's about the interface between what I would call sort of the biomedical culture and its priorities and technologies, etc., and the popular health culture. And at least in public health, I think that's the biggest challenge, probably in other fields as well, whether it's agriculture or whatever. I think the technical elements of the innovations, whatever, are relatively simple, but what's the interface with the cultural realities? And I guess for a long while, as Jan said, I'm American, as you can hear, but I've always been skeptical and a critic of the North American communications models, whether it was the IEC and now it's BCC, behavior change communication. The name has changed, but conceptually, I think nothing has changed. On the one hand, not only very linear, top-down sort of approaches, but also, I think, if one looks at where those models were developed and the premises upon which they were developed, it's a very Western orientation, particularly focusing on individuals, and I think to a great degree, outside of their more collectivist and cultural contexts. And so, have always been, a critic and questioning some of the mainstream models and concepts and approaches. And my work has been much more influenced by anthropology and community psychology and adult education, community development, social work as well, more systemic visions rather than reductionist ones that one finds in public health or in psychology. What I'm going to present today is not a very conceptual presentation. It's more about some practical experiences that we're involved with, but just by way of introduction in terms of sort of the cultural underpinnings of this work. And so I mentioned that I had the occasion to work in various cultural contexts and in maternal and child health programs primarily. And what became very clear and of a concern to me how do you say in English? Through the years, progressively through the years, was the fact that virtually all the international maternal and child health programs focus on women of reproductive age, as though those women were somehow isolated and able to make independent decisions about what they should be doing. But in all of the non-Western cultural context in which I've worked, and even in the ones I haven't worked in, we know that there are culturally designated, more experienced advisors and supervisors of these young women, namely the senior women. Yes? Is this so? Where are you from?
I think that's China.
From China. Yeah. In China. Oh yes. Well, no, just because you're from China, I was just a small story. I've only been in China once, and I was a consultant for WHO for a small workshop, and we were having a dinner. I was sitting next to at the time, about 10 years ago, one of the vice ministers of health, Dr. Ping, a woman. I think now she's with WHO in Manila. And so I started talking to her about grandmothers, and she said, "Oh, very interesting." She said, "We've never really thought of them," because I refer to the grandmothers as a cultural resource. She said, "We've never really seen them as a resource." But she said, "In fact, in China, with the one-child family policy, in fact, theoretically, every woman is a first-time mother. We know that sometimes women have more than one child, but theoretically, every woman is a first-time mother. And so, of course, she needs someone who knows more than she does to help her. Indeed, and she said, you know, in fact, you know, we should think more about the grandmothers and how we can, you know, perhaps support them more. So, yeah, over time it became clearer and clearer to me that this narrow focus on women of reproductive age is a very Western approach, and really leaving out the broader cultural context in which women and families live and develop and all. Today, what I want to, so the beginning of the, going back about 12 years, I started focusing more on the whole issue of senior women. I refer to them as grandmothers, but really the concept is the experienced senior women. We're looking for a term that could easily be translated into Spanish, you know, abuelas, and into French, grand-mère, and so we have grandmothers. But really the concept is experienced women who are providing support to women and children and families. And so as I said, and let's go on to let's go on. I'm changing the, let's see, sorry. Not as automatic as that, is it? What I wanted to share with you then is, first of all, a consideration of the attention given to culture in development programs, or perhaps insufficient attention given to culture in development programs. Specifically looking at the role of elders, not just grandmothers, but elders more broadly, in non-Western societies and in development programs. To get your ideas and share a few of mine regarding the factors that contribute to the focus that I think one observes at a global level, in many cases, most cases, a focus on younger members of communities and family in development programs. And then just briefly to share with you the mission goals of the Grandmother Project, our organization, and then wanted to spend most of the time really sharing with you the experience, as I said, we've had in initial experience in promoting intergenerational learning, and specifically a methodology that we've developed or we're experimenting with for carrying out intergenerational forums in communities to look at different community issues and what the problems are and what the solutions could be, participatory kind of approach. And lastly, the other ideas that you have for, or activities you've been involved with, or ideas that you may have for intergenerational learning strategies. So, as I've already suggested, I think, from my perspective, and I think I'm certainly not alone, although it's not a predominant concern, I don't think, in development, but I definitely feel that in development programs in general, culture is not given sufficient attention. Certainly in public health, I was at School of Public Health in Boston yesterday, and someone had a very fat book on international public health on his desk, and I just looked through the table of contents, and you know, there's a chapter on diarrhea, and there's a chapter on malaria, and there's a chapter on family planning, and there's a chapter on maternal mortality. Not one chapter that talks about families or communities or culture. You know, it's all about the technical sort of priorities of these programs. I think UN AIDS, I'm sorry I don't have the full citation here, the 1999 communications framework for AIDS. I think UN AIDS is one of the organizations, and you maybe know this document better than I do, but one of the organizations that has given more attention and really called for more attention to be given to culture. And in this document they state that culture is the collective consciousness of a people. In other words, suggesting this is something very important in different cultural contexts. But do we always take this into consideration sufficiently in development programs? Dressler and Otts, two anthropologists, who talk about culture in terms of the pervasive influence of cultural meaning systems on the lives of individuals and societies. And the cultural influences permeate all of human thought and behavior. Again, suggesting the significance of culture in the lives of individuals and communities. But unfortunately, especially in the health field that I know better, but I think it's similar in other fields, when culture is referred to in international development documents, very often it's referred to with a negative connotation, cultural barriers or cultural constraints. In French, the pesanteur culturelle, like something that's weighting down, and that people are sort of stuck in this situation, or again the obstacle culturel, or the barreras culturales in Spanish. I think I know there's a 350-page document that World Health Organization produced a couple of years ago on nutrition of young children. And using the search function, you can find culture and cultural. You will find it 4 times in the document, and in all cases, when it's referred to in terms of it's a constraint or it's a barrier. Our friend Wagari Maathai, from the Nobel Peace Prize winner, she has stated that I may be one of the few Africans who believe that culture is an important ingredient of sustainable development. She has suggested that perhaps culture can, in fact, be a resource. And again, going back a bit in time, but UNESCO Conference, another UN organization, that concluded that balanced development can only be ensured by making cultural factors an integral part of the strategies designed to achieve it. And a former World Bank president, I don't think culture is something that gets discussed too often at the bank, but this Sarah Gelden, who talked about, who maintained that there's a need for a cultural framework for development programs, a need to put cultural identity at the center of the development paradigm. I mean, these are a few quotes that those of us who are interested in the cultural issue, you sort of look for them, but I'm sure perhaps you have the same observation in the development literature. It's not, would you agree? It's not, it seems like everyone is talking about it, but in fact that's not the case. And again, particularly in the field that I work in maternal and child health and early childhood development, to me it's astounding how little culture is referred to. Okay. Let's see. The UN organization that's, I think, has given more recently the most attention to culture, the cultural factor, and it seems that there's an Iraqi anthropologist at UNFPA. I don't know what her name is, but evidently from a few UNFPA colleagues that said she has really been the one who's been pushing this agenda. This is the recent, their annual report, the end of last year, where they stated international development agencies ignore culture or marginalize it at their own peril. Culturally sensitive approaches call for different analytical, and operational frameworks. And I mean, what the second part of the statement is saying is that at the initial stage, in terms of analyzing community family settings, it's important to have tools and approaches that help you understand the cultural context and reality. And similarly, in terms of the operational frameworks, when you're planning, developing programs, also there's a need for tools, approaches that help you to think more systematically and factor in the cultural variable. We could have a long discussion about what is culture, and others of you would be better suited than me perhaps to lead that discussion. But, I mean, there's a lot of different ways of thinking about it, a lot of different ideas about it. But just one, a social psychologist actually, Pepitone, who points out two important dimensions of culture. The first one being the normative systems, the attitudes, the values, the beliefs and practices. I think very often when culture is referred to, we think of it solely in terms of this aspect of the beliefs and the practices, again, which can be referred to collective elements, but also very often comes back to individual beliefs and practices. But the other dimension that this author suggests that I think we tend to very much ignore, both in doing initial assessments and in program planning, is the second aspect of what he refers to as social structures and organization. So this is about the family and community systems, the kinship structures, the roles, the hierarchies, you know, who does what, the communication channels and influence, what's going on between all of these people within a family and within families and communities. And one of the, in my way of thinking, one of the key factors of social structure in non-Western cultures that it's very important to understand at the outset and to think about in program planning is the role of elders in the family and the community. And from what I have seen in the literature and other programmatic experiences, I think it's not very frequently that much attention is given to this dimension of family, of community life. What is your experience in terms of what you've read and the programs you've seen and the tools that you've come across, the methods in terms of, let's say, in terms of community assessments, community diagnosis? Is this, in your experience, have you often found that this is one of the elements that is taken into consideration, or that is analyzed at the outset prior to program development? What is your experience?
Well, the majority that I know of, not. Although I do know of some interesting projects that do incorporate, or have incorporated elders.
Uh-huh.
So, but majority no.
The majority no, from your experience. What about others? Is this something in your experience in your different countries and respective programs that is systematically taken into account, considered at the outset, to really look at what is the role of the elders, what role are they playing, what is their influence, what is their advice and knowledge? What is the experience of others? Is that something that's typically taken into consideration in your experiences? Yeah.
I'll add to your question,
Yeah.
there's kind of the development literature is one grand body that I think might suggest a gap. Another body of literature I'm familiar with in ethnographic studies of communication,
Yes.
where this is a central feature in studies. Native American communities, the grandmother and elders are key. African American communication systems foreground,
Yes,
mother,
in the
grandmother,
ethnographic literature.
ethnic
Right.
groups. So
Yes.
it's from that literature, which is the basis from which I do the kind of work that you're doing.
Yes.
That's central and focal. But I understand that's a minority and a small group. I mean, but I share your frustration.
Yeah.
I share your frustration with it lacking in most other literatures, especially the literatures designed to intervene in social problems.
Yes, okay. Someone else? In the community assessments and programs that you've been involved with, has initially examining, interviewing, looking at the role of the elders, has that been an explicit element?
I think, as you pointed out, that
Yeah.
development aid and
Uh-huh.
development programs are normally initiated from a Western perspective. And although there are non-Western people working in these agencies,
Yeah.
the conceptualization is normally done from that perspective. As we know from our own experience that in a Western context, the older you get, the more you consider to be useless or redundant.
Oh.
And calling one and one two, then you'll come to this kind of conclusion.
Okay, all right.
Yes, may I add that
Yes.
the role of the family, at least in my understanding of like interventions in Latin America, is more. It goes just on the nuclear family, like mother, father,
Yeah.
mother and
Yeah.
children in particular,
Yeah.
but not like a grandmother. When grandmothers are so important for us.
Are
and,
they?
And I was raised by them. But certainly, I mean, like I think it's the role of the family has been, I think, targeted, but it's more the nuclear family and not understanding even the extended families as they function in many other societies and countries.
You know, you slipped in that you were raised by your grandmother?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You know, maybe, do you think there could be a relationship between the fact that you were raised by your grandmother and that you're here in this,
Of course.
this higher place,
Yeah.
this institution of higher learning now?
Yeah, and I basically, I believe that, like family, like your trajectory, I mean, family trajectories and very important, in the formation.
You know, I have a psychologist, no, she's not a psychologist, she's a nutritionist and child development person, but she's just recently done a study for Plan International in Senegal. And it was looking really at nutrition, but also caring practices and she found, wasn't intended to do so, but and I can't tell you how she measured this, and it's not out yet, and when it's out I can share it with you. But she found that they looked at young children, they looked at the amount of time that they spent either with their own mothers or with other grandmothers or other senior women in the family. As I say, this larger category of grandmothers. And they found that children who had spent more time with the grandmothers were more intelligent. Which, if one analyzes it, and in my work and in various cultures, people always say the grandmothers have more patience, they have more time, they have more patience, anyway, time and patience, that's something about early childhood stimulation and education and later. So anyway, okay, yes.
When you say this, are you saying that this is just true in Senegal, or are you saying this has been true in all, like that, in all places all over the world, like grandmothers?
Well, I'm talking about, the term I use are non-Western cultures, and maybe, I don't know if is that politically correct? or not, or what should I be saying? I don't know. Anyway, I'm talking about other places other than, you know, North America, Europe, and maybe Australia. So the other more traditional cultures and more collectivist cultures. This is an individualist, more individualist kind of culture, more collectivist cultures, where, as you were saying, the nuclear family is perhaps not the predominant, you know, the configuration, where the more extended family, where there are other influences and all. So there's a document on our website, a review of the literature on the role of grandmothers across cultures. It's called Grandmothers: A Learning Institution. And it really talks, and through that analysis of grandmothers, roles of grandmothers in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Pacific, I concluded that I think there are 7 or 8 or how many core roles that grandmothers play in all of those societies, which are similar. A young woman is pregnant, she's advised by, in pretty much across cultures, by women who are older and who know more than she does. Experienced senior women advise men on issues related to women and children's well-being. Men are not, in the cultures we're talking about where there's more specificity in terms of gender, men are not specialized in pregnancy and breastfeeding, and tends to be the men who advise them. Anyway, a series of core roles: participating in child care, being household health advisors. So those core sort of roles, and then, of course, across cultures, if we're talking about how do families deal with a child who has diarrhea, you know, the Chinese grandmother and the one in Nicaragua and the one in Senegal may give very different advice. But the core role of being involved in diagnosing the problem and doing something in the household context, and then maybe referring beyond that would be similar. Yeah.
Well, I think something that also goes across Western and non-Western contexts is the issue of AIDS. And I have read, and I can't quote exactly where, but in the U.S. and in Barrio and different places in Africa, the role of the grandparents become, you know, crucial when the parents of children are dying.
Yes.
And I have, you know, I've read a few articles about that, and, you know, just journalistic in the newspapers.
Sure.
And I don't know how that really developed into international aid and development programs, but I can't imagine that wasn't taken into account in community health when people in their 20s to 40s were actually dying. And
yeah, just on that point, I think there's 2 different scenarios. There's the AIDS prevalent countries, which are in fact the minority of countries on a global
countries
level.
Or cities in other countries, like in Barrio in New York City, to the Western context, in
or
the U.S.,
context.
it's a low-income area.
I think in the AIDS prevalent areas where you have the middle generation that has been, you know, depleted, by default, the grandparents and particularly the grandmothers are necessarily involved in caregiving. I think in those contexts it's easier to make the argument in those contexts that it's relevant to provide support and involve grandmothers in community programs. Perhaps more difficult in contexts where AIDS is not so prevalent, where the other generation is there, and but where I think grandmothers are still playing a significant role. Okay, let us keep going. Yes.
I think
Then,
in America,
yes.
I think in America, grandmothers are crucial in the education. Our president was raised by his grandmother.
And we have the first grandmother in the White House.
Yes, I mean, so I think it's not just a Western. I think the world is so mixed up now that you have to think of these patterns everywhere, not just in developing countries.
Yeah. No, I think it's certainly true here that young women here, they need support, and grandmothers, you know, why do grandmothers exist?
A lot of them are retired.
To be helping, you know, the younger generation. But my work has been exclusively in developing countries, so that's my context. But yeah, I think to varying degrees, certainly these things are true here as well. Okay, so we're going to do a small exercise. Let's see, how many are we?
16.
16? Okay. Now, how many of you have spent most of your life in a non-Western culture? Okay. How many of you?
I am from.
Yes. Yes. Good. Okay. All right. So we have 1, 2, 3. We have 4 different quotes about the role of elders. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I would like. There were 8 of you that. Let's see. Put up your hands again. The ones. Okay. So could you and you please be in this group, and then let's see. You and you, if you could be in this group, and then you two, if you could be in this group, and then you two in this group. Okay. I want to make sure we have the 2 perspectives in each of the groups. Okay. The task. This is about. 5 minutes, 7 minutes of discussion in the group. Could you write down the several questions I wanted you to think about? The first one is, based on the quote that you are given, what are the key concepts in this quote regarding the role of elders? Okay. What are the key concepts in the quote that you'll be discussing? What are the key ideas, the key concepts in this quote? Secondly, okay. Are there similarities between the attitude or the value regarding elders in the quote and those of non-Western societies with which you are familiar? So, given the ideas about elders that are presented in these quotes, are these ideas about elders similar or different from the ideas regarding the role of elders in the non-Western cultures that you know? Now, if you're not really familiar with any non-Western culture, you might be more of a listener and learner in this experience. But anyway, we're talking here about the non-Western cultures. Are there similarities between actually all of these quotes? Well, Andreas Fuglsang, who was Swedish, but his work was mostly in Africa, and this is from a gerontology conference in Mali. This is in Dakar. This is a Malian philosopher from West Africa, and these are, I believe, Togolese or Beninois. I'm sure it will stop. Okay. And the last question is, to what extent do development programs take the role and status of elders into account? To what extent do development programs take the role and status of elders as expressed in these quotations into account? Okay? So actually, what I would like you to do, some of you have already been assigned to a group, but could you quickly just move around the room and read all 4 quotes and then stand by one of the quotes that particularly interests you? We're just going to ask each of the groups to briefly summarize really their response to the last question, and perhaps in answering the last question to make reference to some of the other things that you discussed. But the group in the back here, who discussed this quote from a Malian philosopher, as I explained, Amadou Hampâté Bâ was a very erudite Malian who had studied in Paris and also knew his local culture. So, this is a very famous quote in Africa that says that in Africa, when an elder dies, it is as though a whole library had burned down. What did the group in the back decide in terms of, or conclude in terms of, to what extent, from your experience, do development programs take this, the reality of what this quote suggests about the role of elders in African cultures into account?
Well,
although we did think that there are programs that target the elders,
Yes.
rarely so with this framework where they're a resource,
Uh-huh.
more so where in some way they're a burden. It might be a health program targeted at the elders, but not so much as a source of knowledge or resource.
So maybe some programs to support them, to help them, but not so much viewing them as a resource.
Exactly.
Okay. Someone else from that group, something to add regarding the third? Okay. I mean, this, we could spend a whole afternoon discussing further these quotes and ideas and experiences, but it seems that the clock keeps ticking. So we keep moving ahead. The second group, let's say, what was the second group? No, I think, well, this was another one that we didn't discuss. Throw this one in. This is heard in many African cultures. I've heard the same proverb. Maybe some of you have as well. Our friend in the back, where are you from?
I'm from Nigeria by the way of South Africa.
Okay, okay. Do you have you heard a quote, a proverb, anything like this in either of those contexts?
Well, not directly, verbally, but the context. Yes.
But similar,
Yeah.
similar. Okay, all right. So we'll go to our friends over here. A gerontology conference in Dakar that concluded, in our societies, the experience and wisdom of the elders should be acknowledged, and they should be full partners in all development efforts with families and communities. What was the conclusion of this group regarding the third question? To what extent do development programs take into account
We didn't get to the third
the ideas? Sorry?
We didn't get to the third
You didn't get there. So that means you get to give your own opinion, since you didn't have a chance to discuss it collectively. What would you say? The development programs that you have seen, do they systematically take into account, it's talking about here the experience and the wisdom of the elders. They should be full partners in all development efforts. From your experience, have you found that to be the case?
Well, from my own personal experience, I think yes, in South Africa, especially with earth communication, in a situation whereby grandparents actually look after their grandchildren in South Africa. I mean,
yes.
It's a big thing.
At the household level.
At the household level. So most government intervention relating to health issues is actually through the grandparents. Well, I mean, what I'm saying is anecdotal. I don't really have.
Okay. Okay. All right. Anyone else in that group who would like to comment on that third question? Yeah.
Just a brief comment. That maybe the program might find elders as a resource, but that might not be explicitly stated as an objective.
Yeah. And I think that's a difference. And I would never say that they are excluded, or if we're talking, let's say, about maternal and child health programs, that grandmothers are excluded. I think very often there are community programs, and a few grandmothers will come along, the more confident ones, the more outgoing ones. But that's very different than saying a key and important group in these activities is the grandmothers, given their importance in the society. And so, yeah. Okay. The third one, our friends here, in fact, I think these are two Ghanaian academics. There's a interesting journal, I don't know if you've seen it, the Journal of Intergenerational Relationships, I think. Yeah, a journal that's been going for 4 or 5 years, and this was from an article that was published there, where they said elders are the guardians of tradition. They are responsible for transmitting core values of the society. Young people should respect them and learn from them by observing them and through the advice they give. What was the conclusion of this group regarding the extent to which development programs explicitly take this into account? Yes?
Well, we talked about application and how that in general it's more of a yes and no. You have a lot of theories urging for, calling for the involvement as well as, the focus of elders as resources, but in truth, in practice, that's not the case.
So there may be some rhetoric along those lines, but usually in programs it doesn't happen.
No.
There was
one. It was more and more now at the beginning.
Yes.
But that
yes.
That is
yeah.
not.
You know, there was
implemented.
one village headman, chef de village in Mali, who said to me one time, you know, in fact, very often you will hear development workers saying the community leaders, the elders, especially they talk about the men, they're the gatekeepers, you know. And he said the translation into French was, he said, I think they see us as the gatekeepers. They come and greet us and do the protocol to start out with, and then they forget that we're even there. Then they carry on with the younger folks in the community, you know. So sometimes a token, you know, in most cases, the initial contact and all, but the question in here, are they substantively, you know, is their knowledge and experience really built on, viewed as a resource? Okay.
Another issue
Yes.
was kind of sort of backwards.
Yes.
That I think Roy brought up that in some technology transfer programs, they're using the young people to get to the elders.
Yeah.
Right. To get the elders to incorporate the new technologies. They're using the young people sort of like
Yes.
yeah.
Teach
Yeah.
them.
Because they see the tight link between the elders and the children. But there's not as much the other way. Yeah.
Okay. This is interesting. Andreas Tuchelsson, who was a communicologist, perhaps we could call him, Swedish guy. Very interesting book. It's called About Understanding. What is the rest of the title? I'm not sure. About Understanding and something about communications. I was telling Jan, the two first books that I ran across that talked about elders and in development and in non-Western societies. One was Margaret Mead's book called 3 Generations, where she talked about the importance of grandparents in passing on traditions and culture. And the other one was this book. It's if you're interested in non-Western cultures and communications, introducing change into cultural contexts, I would really recommend this book, which is out of print, but which you can get on Amazon. Used copies you can get for $182 or $196 or something like that. You know, it's very, very interesting. And he said elders are the information storage and processing unit in the community. Interesting in 1982 that he was using this computer knowledge, computer language. Indeed, there were computers then, but what did this group conclude? To what extent do development programs take into account this, the role of elders, the central role of elders in non-Western societies and communities? What did your group conclude?
One conclusion that I would draw is actually a question.
Yes.
And that is, do we over-romanticize the value of indigenous knowledge and knowledge of elders in an age when we're experiencing very rapid social and technical change? And that ranges from the issues of globalization in agriculture to all the changes in the health field.
Okay. A question? Okay. Good. We could go on to discuss that question, but we'll leave that for okay, but an important question. Some other conclusion based on the discussions in the other groups? One other person? From where we started with talking about the need to give more attention to culture in designing and implementing development programs. Yes.
And one thing that makes me think about is that the elders as knowledge holders are even more important in a illiterate culture where it's oral tradition. I remember growing up, my father, when he wanted to do something, would go and talk to an older friend of his father's.
In what cultural
Guatemala?
context? In Guatemala, yes.
Yeah, he would go, my father was very educated, affluent, but he would go to a friend of his father.
Yes.
Or my uncle would go to a friend I know going with him to farms way in the mountains looking some old man to ask him advice on something that was not written. It was just passed on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think my conclusion, sort of coming back to what we were saying before, but from my experience, Yeah, I do think there's often a gap between the roles and realities of cultures and development programs, and that it's one major reason why many development programs do not have a greater impact, because just because of the not a good interface and not really building on what already exists. And I think, related to your question, I think and this comes back to Pepitone's 2 levels of the knowledge, attitudes, and practices and the social structures. Certainly there's new information. And if we take the case of a simple case like treating diarrhea, in many non-Western cultures, in this culture as well, in times past, but the belief is that when a child has diarrhea, you shouldn't give them more fluids because it will increase the diarrhea. And the advice of health workers is that you should give more fluids, even if the diarrhea continues. What's important is that the child doesn't become dehydrated. But the point is that I think very often programs focus on the women of reproductive age rather than building on the role of the senior women, the grandmothers, as recognized family advisors and improving their knowledge, so that not destabilizing their role, but improving the extent to which giving them new information, but helping them to play their role in a more effective way. So just wanted to share with you, we've shared a few of our ideas about, in this group, about kind of reflecting on these ideas that have come from Africa that I've shared with you. But here, I wanted to share one or two, maybe just one example from Malawi of how sort of the words of some community members and their thoughts about the extent to which development programs take into account the role of the elders. This grandmother, rather old grandmother, but very active, very articulate in Malawi. I was involved with Save the Children doing an assessment of a community strategy that was involving the grandmothers and the grandfathers. It was a neonatal health project trying to help families to improve the care of women during pregnancy and their diet and all, and also then the care of newborns. And so we were interviewing this grandmother, asking her about what did she think about this, that the fact that she and other grandmothers and grandparents were involved. And she said, this is wonderful. She says, we never saw anything like this before. She said, always the programs come and they want to have the young people, the people who know how to read and write. So she said, of course, that leaves us out. And she said, you know, and she said, sometimes it's for gardens, and sometimes it's for health, and sometimes it's for microfinance, and sometimes it's for HIV, AIDS, the topics. But always, she said, they come and they take the young people off for training. And she said, and then, do you know what happens? They come back and they try to teach us. And she put her hands over her ears and she said, and I yell at them and I say, no, I will not listen. You are not supposed to be teaching us. We are supposed to be teaching you. You see the conflict in terms of some of these very Western ideas that children possibly should be teaching their elders. I have a friend, Pat Pridmore, who's an educationalist who teaches at the University of London, and she did her PhD. She looked at the child-to-child health education strategy, which is about children teaching learning good health habits and then teaching their parents at home. One of her main conclusions was that culturally it's at conflict with non-Western cultures, where the situation is more what she's describing. And then we interviewed a grandfather, and he went on to say, an older gentleman in the community, he was commenting as well, and he said, he was sitting on the other side of the courtyard, and he had heard her say this, and I said, what do you think about what she's just said? And he said, these young people who have learned these new things and tried to come back and teach us, this is showing disrespect for us and for the culture. Then there was a young man, a third person that we interviewed. He had been involved, one of the activities in the Save the Children project was little theater productions on the different topics related to neonatal health. And again, it was the people who had been chosen to do the role plays. I don't think it required reading or writing, but for some reason they had chosen the young people. So they were supposed to go from community to community and stand up in front of the community and teach. It was supposed to be community meetings, including people of all ages, teach them about certain traditional practices that should be abandoned and newer practices to be adopted. And I asked him, what did he think about what the grandmother had said? And he said, it's true what she said. He said, when we were being trained, we were so uncomfortable with what we were being asked to do. And I said, well, did you say anything? He said, because we were expected to go back and teach the elders and other community members. And he said, well, no, because that was what the program was. And in fact, what happened was that they started doing these plays, and some of it was talking about pregnancy and things, and there was a reaction on the part of some of the communities. And fortunately, they discussed and decided, we'll include in these theater, why not have the grandmother who's giving this advice or whatever, why not include the elders in the role plays and in the theater? And evidently the young man playing a young man, but not in a role of teaching the elders. So the second one that I'll just share with you briefly, similar, but again, this religious leader, imam, and then the young men, and then to lead into talking about this idea of the intergenerational forums. This was during one of these intergenerational forums, or during the break when I had interviewed this gentleman and asked him what he thought about the approach and all, and he said, this is wonderful to have the young people here with the elders. So this is grandmothers, grandfathers, young women, and young men, all four. He said, always, and he listed off, it's the wells, or it's planting the trees, or it's building the school, or whatever. Always programs come and they say they want those in the community who know how to read and write. Now, as you were saying, I don't know if he reads and writes Arabic. He's a low-level Muslim leader, but he may not. I don't know whether he knows how to read and write. But anyway, he's a very knowledgeable person. But he said, always the preference is towards the young people. And he said, our role in the community is to advise and to help and to share our knowledge, but often we're not given the opportunity to. I went over to the group of young men and asked them, what do you think about this? Some of the elders are saying that the programs typically come and involve you young people and don't explicitly involve the elders. And they said, yes, it's true. It's always that way. And I said, well, what do you think about it? They said, well, it's very difficult for us. They said, we know that our elders have much more experience in life, in so many things, in how you organize activities, in how you mobilize the community, so many different aspects. But always the focus is on us. And they said, of course, behind the scenes, very often we're getting the advice of the elders. But they said, very often it's difficult for us. They said it would be much better if we were together rather than separated. So, a couple of two visual examples of how this, what I refer to as the youth bias in development programming, is reflected. Can you see what it says here? This is a Save the Children poster that says, to save children around the world, we must turn to the experts, their mothers. What's the message in this poster? First of all, how old is the woman in the picture?
17.
Okay. What's the message here? What's the message that this poster is trying to put across, or the statement that this poster is making?
They used to be the experts for the children.
Yeah, it's saying that this young woman is an expert. Is that true? Is it true? And is it culturally appropriate?
Depends upon the topic.
We're talking about maternal and child health. Yes, of course it depends on the topic. Yes, if we're talking about computers, it would be different. But here we're talking about to save children around the world. So we're talking about maternal and child health. Yes?
Yeah, I think there are two issues here.
Yes?
Sometimes the grandmoms didn't know the correct way, like the traditional way. They
Okay.
hurt the children more, like the belief that putting something in the throat
Yes.
of the kid,
Okay.
you know, to help that it burn the children.
Right.
And then
They have some inappropriate
Yeah,
practices.
yeah.
Yes.
And sometimes they do know about, like, after giving birth that you will have herbal therapy and that kind of stuff that the Western people don't have.
Okay.
About the steaming and so on
Right.
after giving birth. To
Right.
put the uterus back in its
Yes.
shape. So that kind of, there are two things, like we say in Thai, you know, there are two types of elders. The one who was as useless as the coconut shell, and the other ones were very precious, like the antique ceramics.
Yes.
You know, so there are two types.
Okay, but do you think this is culturally sensitive, this poster? I mean, looking at the concept that it's, if you are senior women in the community, how would you feel about what is being said here in a poster or by a person or on a radio, you know, on a radio program or whatever? Yes?
No, I have a question actually. So
go right.
I mean, my question is like, I see where you're going with this, but also I just feel like in some communities, it's an entire community of women who takes care of children. It's not necessarily just the grandmothers, it's sisters and mothers and.
Of course.
So
Of course.
I mean, like one.
Right.
If I were making this ad, it wouldn't just be like the mothers. It would be like a community of women because it's not necessarily just grandmothers. I would say.
But we're talking about the experts.
Right.
Who are the experts on maternal and child health in the communities that you know? Is it younger women?
No.
If you interview younger women, they will say no. They will say, younger women, they will say, I have to learn from someone who knows more than I do.
Who has the power too? Where's the power?
You know, I'm trying to be a bit provocative here and hope none of you are high-level officials in Save the Children, but anyway. And the other one, this is from CARE. No, just these are the images that are being projected. These are the messages that are being. How old do you think this woman? Probably Guatemalan, no? How old do you think she is? It's not so clear, but maybe you saw the original. But she has the power to change her world. You have the power to help her. It's all about empowerment. Well, yes, we could say yes. Yes. I think in North America, empowering women is always good.
Well, if you look at these ads, like who is the audience? Obviously, the audience here is like a donor somewhere. So I think, you know.
But you see, what I would like to see is what I would like to see, as you were saying, it's a whole group. I would like to see her with her baby and her mother next to her. That's who we need to empower.
It depends too, because it may be that giving her some economic, like the Grameen Bank is doing, power or something, will make her more powerful, because she could also be a slave to the grandmother or the mother-in-law.
Yeah.
So it's in some ways you have to educate the mother-in-law to respect her, but you also have to, you have to take everybody into account.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you think it is that many development programs focus more on younger people?
I think because many of the programs were done by Western people when they went to a local community. First, the language is a key factors here to consider, because the younger people may have better knowledge in language, and they can have better communicate with the outsiders, so they may choose
Okay.
the younger generation.
Okay, okay. Yes? Uh-huh.
I think also you get this idea with education and development that the young generations are the future. So you're trying to impact the future, and how can you do that? You target them and kind of forget, unfortunately, about...
Young people are the future, yeah.
So.
But, and in Africa, there are all sorts of proverbs that say, you know, what will the future be without the wisdom of the elders to support youth as they move into the future. But yeah, you hear that very often.
So has your project been able to impact some of this? Because you said you were working on the grandmother project. Have you been able to make an intervention, or could you talk about a little bit about that?
Yeah, I will. Yes, and I can. And certainly there are things to answer briefly. Briefly to answer your. This is my musical background. Briefly to answer your question, yeah, we've involved grandmothers and recognized their role and strengthened their knowledge. Yeah, so it's a win-win kind of situation where it's building on their role but making them improving the advice that they're giving. Yeah, what were you going to say? Yes.
So do you find that the answer to that question was mainly ignorance? That the reason why there isn't more involvement of the senior citizens is ignorance on the part of the development program?
I'm asking you.
Yeah, and apparently the answers that came up were more of that, oh, they're unaware of this, or they're seeing the young people as the future. There's always like the answers seem to be as if they were not seeing, a lack of seeing the elders. And I was just wondering if you would have any other insight as, is it only an aspect of not seeing a reality? Or would there be other factors that also play a role in not involving the elders in the development programs?
Well, do others have ideas? Could there be other biases against elders that maybe, well, Jan just said before, he said something, a comment on the situation of elders here. And what did you say before, Jan? The older you get, the less you're respected. Something like that. Is that true in China? You're from China?
Yeah.
Is that true in China? The older you get, the less you are respected?
Generally not, because before the modernization process influenced China, the older you are, the more respect you will get.
Yes.
But now it seems the modernization view seems to want to influence and maybe have some sad effect for the local culture. Well,
some sad effect?
Yes. I mean, in the young generation, and maybe in China it should be the middle age. People give too much attention. Well, both the young and the older has been ignored.
What about in Thailand? In Thailand is as people get older, are they less respected?
No, they are, but depends. Sometimes.
It depends, but in general?
Yeah, in general they do, but they do.
In general, what?
In general, young people do respect the elders. It's embedded in the culture. Yeah. But sometimes it's like kind of commanding when we are talking in a group. People say, you have to think about to be gratitude to the elders, to everyone without thinking about their characteristics, Like you can't be gratitude or respect every elders because they are mothers or they get grandmother who sold their children into prostitution. We can't respect those people.
Okay. Well, you asked me my opinion. I mean, I think, and I'm kind of throwing some of this out, and the discussion certainly won't be finished today. But I think that, and the world is changing, of course. But I think that with globalization, basically it's values being transmitted in one direction. And the way I see it is that indigenous cultures are under attack, basically. And that there's not very much reflection or action on the other side. It's starting a bit, the whole indigenous peoples movement and all, to try and think about well, do we all want to be like little North Americans, or are there some things in our culture that it's important to try and preserve, and amongst those, in including others, perhaps, you know, the role of elders. But I think, you know, North America even more than Europe, you know, tend to be have a lot of ageist sort of biases, as Jan was saying, you know. So I think, and I think that when we talk about designing development programs, very often the people designing those programs, I mean, today they are mostly people, they're Venezuelans or Thais or Chinese or Indians. They're not expatriates, they're not people from the West, but many of those people have been trained in the fine schools and models that have come from somewhere else, and that may not be totally adapted to the cultural realities. As you were saying, if they only focus on nuclear families, and up until now, I mean, in Latin America, the more extended family context still has a lot of influence. So anyway, very complex, but so my work in, as I said, mainly in community health and maternal and child health, it led me to the conclusion, and then experimentation, work with different community programs, really trying to switch paradigms, view the grandmothers not as an obstacle but as a resource, and so we have had, in all cases, the first experience working with grandmothers was in Laos, and then in Senegal, and then in Mali, and then in Uzbekistan, and then in Albania, and then in Mauritania, and back in Senegal again. In all cases, the switch was explicitly involving the grandmothers, because the concept that I have is that the role that grandmothers and other elders, but just talking now for grandmothers, the role that grandmothers play in community programs should be like a mirror. The role that they play in the society should be reflected in the programs. There shouldn't be a gap. To the extent that, and we've done a lot of qualitative, so I've done a lot of work in qualitative research, and so qualitative studies on household roles and dynamics, not only of grandmothers, but of household members in general. And what all of those studies have shown, as I was saying, was that if we're talking about maternal and child health, the household advisors, the primary household advisors related to those issues are senior women. Okay, that means if we're doing a program on some of those health and maternal and child health issues, those women should have a central place. That's, we call this a culturally grounded approach, an approach that builds on the roles that exist. And then, of course, as our friend from Thailand was saying, some of their advice is good and some is not. But unfortunately, oftentimes, with my friends in public health, their bad advice is a reason for not including them. And my perspective is that to the extent that they are influential and have authority and tend to be respected, it's much better to include them rather than exclude them. So, so I was working on doing this work and developing an approach related to your question. Okay, if indeed the qualitative assessment has shown that the senior women are influential, then what sort of approach could be used to engage them, to involve them, and to strengthen their knowledge? And that's what I've been working on, first independently, and then in 2005 we created the Grandmother Project, of which the mission is to improve the health and well-being of women and children in developing countries by building the capacity of development organizations to implement grandmother inclusive and intergenerational community programs. So it's an organizational capacity building strategy. The way I see it, there are thousands of programs being implemented by non-governmental and also governmental organizations in communities in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Pacific, that do not explicitly involve grandmothers, that do not explicitly see them as an important resource. And so our objective is to help as many of those organizations as possible, mainly through training and follow-up and technical assistance and tools and methodologies to develop grandmother inclusive and then intergenerational programs. I'm doing a presentation tomorrow at noon at the Center for International Education, where I'm going to talk more about the grandmother inclusive approach in health. I want going to talk with the time we have left today a bit more about the intergenerational approach. The goal of this work is both to contribute to promoting healthier families and communities, but also more cohesive families and communities. I think that very often in development programs we're concerned about our technical agendas. We want people to plant their trees like this or raise their children like that, and we don't think very much about what impact are these activities having on the cohesiveness of the society more broadly. And now I'll just share with you a quote from I did a presentation a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, at a regional social work school in Senegal, in Dakar. And the presentation was about, perhaps similar to this, it was talking about the importance or I was arguing for the need to give more attention to culture in development programs with the broader umbrella, and under that the need to involve elders generally, and then talking about maternal and child health and child development to involve grandmothers. And at the end of the presentation there was a Senegalese sociologist, a gentleman in his late 50s, and I had talked about what I refer to as the youth bias in development programming, and he said, I think it's very important what you were saying about this youth bias in development programs. He said, for the past 20 years, if not more, he said, all of the programs that we have observed, planting the trees, democracy, water and sanitation, get the girls in school, do this to, for health, to not get sick, do this to deal with health problems. He said all of the programs have had a major focus on young people. And he said, in my way of seeing things and analyzing, he said, I think this is one of the factors that contributes to the breakdown in communication between the generations that we observe today in our society. He was talking about this issue of social cohesion or the breakdown therein. I think whether we're working on trees or gardens, we tend to work on these issues in a very narrow way without asking some bigger questions about what is the impact of these programs going to be on the wider well-being of these societies. And that's why this is the second part of our goal, which we haven't quite figured out how to measure yet and assess. We're working on that, but it's really talking about supporting families and communities to bring about systems sort of change. Any comment on what my Senegalese friend Umar Ba said? What do you think about that? He said that programs that always focus on youth, we think we're doing something very useful, and certainly we are, but at the same time, it could have an unanticipated negative impact on the society.
It makes sense, in terms of, generating communication dynamics and interactions that can go against the grain.
Can go against the grain.
And be more divisive, so because one of the things that is, we don't, in any kind of intervention, I mean, power dynamics are always at play, and here you say how we use this power dynamics, which is the authority of the elder, you know, as a resource, and how much actually we can work with it. Like, one of my questions for you is, like, for instance, in changing practices with this particular population, and given that in particular societies, the role of the elder is actually more prominent than in others. I mean, like, there is, I would say, you know, the opportunities as well as the challenges to work with that population. And I guess that it's just if we work in the intergenerational mode that we can break the potential opportunities for elders to kind of just amass more power and use it against or you know, in spite of what the interventions. So the intergenerational aspect of your program is what I think is also very interesting, and would like you to comment more on that, because it's potentially where, you know, the balance of a power dynamic lies, or potential lies.
Sure, yes. Let me see, I'm trying to think, because I'm looking at, okay, I think because the clock, I think your clock goes faster than all other clocks, Jan. Anyway, I see the clock rushing along.
Don't blame me, blame the chancellor.
Okay, well, I'll keep going a bit. I think we won't get to something I wanted to share with you, but that's okay. So the principles of grandmother project programs are these three: grandmother inclusion, intergenerational learning, and participatory learning for empowerment, using adult learning, communication for development, participatory, kind of very much based on Paulo Freire's sort of thinking. And our work in organizational capacity building is both with training schools and with other, as I said, other organizations that have operational programs. Okay, so I want to explain to you about just something about these intergenerational forums and the very interesting response of communities to them. Initially we weren't thinking about intergenerational learning. We were thinking about grandmother inclusive approaches, because as I said, my background was in health and nutrition, and the several colleagues had similar sorts of background. Our concern was women and children's health and well-being, early childhood development. But what we realized from a lot of qualitative documentation that we were doing in working with, I mean, for example, working on a nutrition education strategy in Senegal, involving both young women and grandmothers. What we realized, and primarily the feedback, the comments from men of different ages, was that, you know, this is very, very beneficial that you're involving the grandmothers, because we're observing that the communication between the grandmothers and the mother-in-laws is improving. Now, you know, why would that be? Well, one reason was partly because what you said. It's not only get the elders involved and make them more and more powerful, but it was also about grandmothers being supportive and listening more, and, you know. But the other part of it is, imagine, in all over Africa, correct me if I'm wrong, all of the cultures that I've been involved in and done studies in programs, there's the belief that if a woman is pregnant, she should keep working hard. She shouldn't rest too much, especially not sit down in the afternoon. No. She should be working hard, and in West Africa, she should especially keep pounding, because if she pounds, it will, you know, prepare her muscles for the delivery. She'll be better prepared. And you know, one of the things that the Ministry of Health, WHO Ministry of Health, promotes is that pregnant women should have a little rest in the afternoon, 20 minutes or half an hour, you know, to give the idea that she shouldn't just be working full stop, she should have a bit of a rest. So imagine you have mother-in-laws who are saying work very hard and no rest. They say, if you sit down and rest, then you are lazy. And the worst thing for me is to have a lazy daughter-in-law, right? Okay, so imagine, how does the woman feel? I mean, she's anemic, she's tired out, she has to keep going, Now, if the grandmother has been involved and she comes back and says, oh, my dear, you need to be, we're going to re-delegate the work. I'm going to take on a bit more, and maybe some of the other co-wives, whatever, will take on some of the other work. And so that you'll have left to do. And in the afternoon, we want you to have a little rest every day, because I learned in my class that you should be resting every afternoon. Well, how does the woman feel? And how does she feel about her relationship with her mother-in-law? Anyway, the first time that this started coming up, I was surprised, but time and time again, and so over time, we really realized that, if they have the same information, if they're thinking along the same lines, potentially that can improve the communication between them. And, if the mother-in-law is advising the same thing as the health worker, this makes it easier for the woman as well. Because I think we often put women in a difficult situation. The health worker tells her to do one thing and her mother-in-law tells her to do something else. What is she going to do? Does she want to go against the wishes of her mother-in-law and make her life difficult for her? But essentially that's what we're asking her to do, to cause problems for herself by doing something that's different than what the mother-in-law is advising.
Are these grandmothers open to this idea? There seems to be like some kind of assumption that I'm trying to understand, like that these people have been ignored, and now these agencies have come down and paid attention to them and taught them, and I don't know, I might be in this, and now they're getting it, and now they can tell the other people. So I'm not clear.
It's too good to be true.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, the first time, I don't think I'm getting on with intergenerational learning, but I guess that's okay. The first time in Laos, I was very surprised when we'd done this community qualitative study. This was on household treatment of diarrhea. And so we did this little quantitative study to find out what the different roles of the women, the husbands, the older sibling daughters, the grandmothers, the grandfathers, etc. And we found that indeed, in terms of household treatment of diarrhea, indeed the grandmothers were the key figures who had experience, who were looked to for their knowledge, who were on the first line of defense in terms of deciding what to do, etc. Okay, so we went back, and I say we, the role that we play as an organization that I was playing at that time as a consultant is working with a team of Laotians, certainly. It's a team of Laotians from the from the Institute of Maternal and Child Health in Vientiane. So we were sitting in the pagoda where the Buddhist pagoda where these sessions took place with the grandmothers, and we were sitting on the mat, and we said, well, we've come back and we did the study and we learned so many things from you, and we see that you have a lot of knowledge, some of which was bad, like mixing up elephant dung and giving it to children. Not very, useful from our perspective, but we didn't talk about that to start out with. We said, we know you have a lot of experience. And in fact, we realized, yes, that some of their knowledge, their advice was not good. We said, we're thinking of coming back, and we were thinking of coming back now and then and kind of learning more from you and sharing some new ideas with you. What do you think about that? Well, to our great surprise, the rest that we said to them, the latter part was that we said, we know that there's a proverb in Laotian which says that you can't bend an old piece of bamboo. So, would it be worthwhile to come back? No? Sort of challenging them. And one of the grandmothers, that to our great surprise, said, everyone says that about the old piece of bamboo, but it's not true. She said, in fact, if you make a fire and you heat up the bamboo, you can bend it slowly, which is how they make rattan furniture, right? She said, of course, it wouldn't be sufficient to come one time or twice, and you have to be patient, but it's not true. And we want to know the new things. We know that there's science and that the world has evolved, and we know that these young ones have been to school and they know things that we don't know. But if we're not invited, how can we know about those things? And that same discourse we have heard every time. When the approach is based on just what you said, on respect and listening, rather than, you know, the message-driven approach of coming in and say, okay, grannies, sit down there, we're going to tell you what to do. You know, and where it's a process of dialogue and them telling what they know. Okay, and a very important part, and this is the singing part, are you ready? A very important part of this, an important tool, have been songs of praise. Do you have your vocal cords ready? Okay, even if you don't speak Wolof, which is the primary, or the most widely spoken language in Senegal, I'm sure you'll be able to sing along this song of praise to the grandmother. So I'll sing it first and then you can join in. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yes! Okay, here's how it goes. Mamboy, yakaba, yakaba. Mamboy, ya ya tute, barrier mande. Mamboy, na la fia la baye. Are you ready? Mamboy, yakaba, yakaba. Mamboy, ya ya tute, barrier mande. Mamboy, na la fia la baye. Well, how do you think the grandmothers feel when these young health and development workers come in and sing such a song to them? How do they feel?
Excited.
Excited? What else? You said, what does that mean?
Maybe they feel like they're being included, or there's a attempt to understand where they're coming from and part of their culture.
Okay, they're being recognized.
Recognized.
What else?
Honored.
These young ones. No, they're all pretty much younger than they are. The health and development workers younger than they are. How do they feel?
They're not threatening anymore, the health worker. The health worker is not as threatening.
They're not threatening them. They're not criticizing them. What else?
They're honoring them.
They're honoring them. Yes?
So the word for grandmother in Wolof is boy?
No, mom. No, mom.
Oh,
No,
okay.
it's mom.
Oh,
No, mom is
that's
dearest.
okay.
No, mom is dear. No, mom is senior woman is mom. Mom. Uh-huh.
No, just like here in this room, actually, we heard a wonderful talk by Nick Caldron. You know, remember about the politics of recognition, and if there was, I don't know, at the beginning of the semester, just right now, you know, listening to you, I say, well, it's an example.
So, are these some initial elements of answer to your question? You know, I think it's the same with the grandmothers or with any of us or with a child. The first thing is that you show interest and love and respect and confidence that you can do it. You know, it's like with a child or with any of you or any of us. It's like that whoever's trying to teach you something has confidence in you and cares about you. And especially when it's grandmothers, given their library, right? Given their experience and wisdom, it can't be the approach that you use with young people when you bring them in and line them up and say, okay, here's the messages that you're supposed to, because that's an offense to them, given all of their knowledge and experience. What else would you like to ask? But you should come tomorrow at noon if you want to know more about the kind of the approach with working with yes?
Have you had any question of what the influences of like television or radio on these grandmothers? Do they listen? Do they see? Has it affected them? Because television is coming in big in a lot of the third world, and do they adopt any of the things from the TV, or are they completely
well,
against
you know, there's something about social networks and peer groups and the influence of peer groups on learning and possible changes, you know, and I think that grandmothers, like other groups in society, and what the research in communications has shown is that yeah, the media are very, very important for providing information, but in terms of really changing practices, it's the interpersonal kind of interaction that, and so they've heard things certainly on the radio, information, but I think it's really at the level of in their social networks and amongst peer groups, you know, that the real learning and change probably comes about. I don't think that, yeah, especially with the grandmothers, I think that they're, and yeah, I mean, they're less tuned in to the media and all, and so I think, and given the oral tradition, and also, yeah, very often things on the radio, television don't talk that much about the elders, or often they criticize them even. Often they criticize them. Often there's, I know in Uzbekistan there was a whole series of dramas about different health topics that they put on television, and in each one of them, the person with the bad ideas who was being criticized was the grandmother. Yeah, they have some bad ideas, you know. So, and I know when we were interviewing grandmothers in Mauritania, they were saying, oh, the Ministry of Health is against us. And we said, well, why do you say that? Because on the radio all the time, there are announcements saying that you shouldn't listen to the bad things that the mother-in-laws are saying. So, I don't know, but, sorry?
That could be another way in which the grandmothers could be included.
Yes, in a positive light, indeed, indeed. Well, I think I didn't time things very well. I wanted to share with you about the Intergenerational Forums, but the time has run out.
Maybe by way of a few concluding questions.
Yeah.
If there are any.
I just was going to see if these are a few of the pictures of the Intergenerational Forums, the grandmothers. This is a religious leader, and this was just, I'll just conclude with this. I was going to share this with you, but this was a problem tree that an exercise that we did with the groups of grandmothers, grandfathers, young women, and young men. And given the concern that had come out from the community assessment about the breakdown in communications between the generations. And so we had the 4 groups discuss, so we said, you know, it's like a tree, and written on the tree trunk was this problem of breakdown in intergenerational communications, and had the 4 groups discuss what are the roots of this problem. And anyway, I was going to share with you, yeah, the different ideas that they came up with that were then pasted on there, and then discussion about, well, what can be done to possibly to address these problems. And so that was the exercise. Sorry, can I read you?
Just read them.
Okay, if you want me to read them? Okay. All right. Youth. So this is kind of a synthesis of the different. There were 6 forums, and so 12 different communities. Youth and elders spend little time together. Young people are more interested in TV, music, and soccer than spending time with elders. Young people are more interested in the youth world on TV than in the traditional world, of culture. The youth world on TV. Everyone perceives that TV is about the youth world. You know, in Nicaragua, yeah, people talk about, you know, the TV, everything that comes. It's the culto de la juventud. You know, it's the cult of youth that's being projected on TV in many cases. Grandmothers and grandfathers don't encourage children to spend time with them. So they were saying it's not only the children that are pulling away, but maybe grandparents aren't doing enough. Decreased storytelling by grandmothers. Of course, storytelling is passing on so many things. Some parents discourage children from spending time with their grandparents. Unfortunately, I think it's a bad influence because many young people sense that adults or elders are not open to their ideas. Some elders are rigid and strict, and children are afraid of them. Young people are afraid of some of the elders who may bewitch them. This is an area of Senegal where this is very strong. You know, do you know what I mean? Bewitching? Do you understand? Our friend from China? No. How do you, yeah, it's like they cast a spell. Do you see? The evil eye? The evil eye? Yeah. So they're saying they would be afraid because the elders are the ones who have more of that power, and they might, so if you're, you know, young people spend most of their time at school or with their heads in their books. Schools don't teach cultural values and traditions. A lot of criticism of the school on the part of young people as well. Young people said the same thing. We don't learn about our traditions in school. Regretting it. Children value school learning more than traditional knowledge and values. Some, particularly the senior men, talked about the law against corporal punishment. They said, we can't beat the children anymore. If we could beat them more, the communication would be better. That was a very hot topic of discussion. Development programs only involve those who know how to read and write. So they were saying because of that, that pulls us apart. Adults believe that schools are responsible for educating children. And the belief, and then one more. What they said was that, they said since colonial times, the Ministry of Education, UNICEF, everybody's coming by saying children should go to school to be educated. They should go to school to educate. If you want your children to be educated, they must go to school. No one has said that part of the education is the education that you should be giving them at home about your culture and values. So they have like devalued it. This is what they've heard. And the last one, some elders don't want to share their knowledge.
I think that's really interesting. It kind of comes full circle around to the beginning of your talk when you were saying how elders are respected more in non-Western cultures, and I think these snippets of people analyzing the issue really elucidate that it's much more complex than that. You know, that there is a lot more dynamics going on in the community that some have to do with put in motion by development projects, but some are really just changes happening, globalization, as you mentioned. So, you know, I appreciate hearing about.
Yeah, it's a good way to wrap up.
Okay.
You've given us quite a bit of food for thought, so thank you.
Well, that was the objective. Yeah.
ayet majarat nashikan